Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I am your host, Eric Smith, and today I am talking about Ancestor by Scott Sigler, and this is from Broadway Paperbacks. And what we have with Ancestor is, in a nutshell, a biotech company that is attempting to create a sort of hybrid creature between human and animal, where they can this creature will grow human organs for transplant. Since there's a shortage of organs to transplant it to people, they're trying to come up with something that can increase the number of organs available. They're trying to make a docile creature, but what they come up with has razor sharp teeth and claws and is very predatory and is very hungry. And that's it in a nutshell. Alright, so Ancestor by Scott Sigler. First of all, this was recommended to me by a longtime viewer and commenter, Broncanis. Not sure how you say his screen name, so I'm just going to go with that. He recommended I read this book, and I'm very glad he did. I really dig that cover. So, this is the first novel that I've read by Sigler. I've read at least one of his short stories, maybe others. And I really dug this. The story is compelling. As I said, this biotech company are our heroes. What they're doing is working with DNA. One of the scientists has created something called the God Machine, and as I said, they're trying to find a way to. They're using cows, and they're trying to implant embryos into the cows that won't be rejected in an animal, because you can't experiment on people, of course. But they want to, so they're putting these embryos in cows. They're trying to grow a creature that is close enough to human that the organs can be used to transplant. And, but as is the case with any book like this, something goes horribly, horribly wrong. And they've essentially created monsters. So first of all, what I find interesting is is that most of the characters are good guys. There is one definite sociopath, and there's one guy that's a complete asshole. But everybody else, they're good people for the most part, but they're also complex. Our hero is P.J. Colding. And he's a complex character. He's a good guy, but he acts like an asshole every once in a while. You know, he's not a cookie cutter heroic type. He's, I guess, the troubleshooter for this biotech company. The top manager. The company's owned by the Paglione brothers, Dante and Magnus, and P.J. Colding is the guy that's the on-site, in-charge guy, and he's a rich, complex character. All of the other people that are working on this project, almost all. Again, one of the security guys is the asshole. The other security guy, I love this guy. He's ex-military. And he's writing vampire romance fiction in his spare time. Just an interesting character. The actual scientists working on the project, Dr. Rumkorff, who's in charge. I don't want to say too much about each of the characters and give anything away, but Rumkorff, on the face of it, they're all working to save millions of lives if they can accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, because there will be plenty of organs available for transplant. I don't think this is a huge spoiler. It seems pretty obvious early on that Dr. Rumkorff, despite constantly talking about saving millions of lives, I think for him it's more about, one, simply doing what no one else has done before, and the fame and fortune that will come along with that. So again, motives within motives. And Jian, Jian, the Chinese genius, is a wonderful character. Very complicated. Quite the catalyst for a lot of what goes on. Erica Hoel, Hoel, just interesting. Tim Feely, all the people, the scientists, not just cookie cutter scientist characters. And there's a catalyst at the beginning of the story. We meet Colonel Paul Fisher. I believe his name is Paul. He works for the government organization USIMRAD, I believe is what they call it. I don't remember what it stands for, but basically it's a watchdog for bio problems. That's very vague. But anyway, he shows up at the very beginning of the book. He is at the site of a different biotech company where there has been a disaster. And he has to make the tough calls. And because of what has happened here, the government and the world governments decide they're going to shut down all these other biotech labs, including our main guys. The place owned by the Pagliones, the place where PJ Colding works. So this is almost a sub-ish plot, but a catalyst for a lot of what goes on. Colonel Fisher shutting these places down. The Pagliones don't want their place shut down. Of course, the scientists don't want to shut down, and they believe they're close to a breakthrough. So they're trying to keep going with this sort of world government pressure coming down on them. And there's a point where they have to relocate, and we meet C5 plane pilot Sarah Purinam, if that's how you say her name, who another fantastic character, probably the closest to a pure character, for lack of a better way to put it. She is a well-rounded, but she's really one of the few without any type of ulterior motives, or doesn't have, like I said, PJ Colding can very much be an asshole at times. Sarah, we don't see that in her. But again, doesn't mean she's two-dimensional, a very three-dimensional character. But anyway, she comes in with her crew in the C5. They have to move the lab and the experiment and everything because of certain circumstances. So just lots of great characters is what I'm saying. Wonderful characters. And then the pacing of this book is amazing. And it reflects in the chapters and how they're written. Now, when I first picked this up, it did take me a little bit of time to get into it, but that's no fault of the book. Aside from the usual learning about all new characters and getting into the style of a new writer, which can be harder sometimes than others. This wasn't that bad. But it mainly had to do with my time, and I didn't have a lot of time to sit down. I'd read maybe a chapter or two at a time. And for those short bursts, it's hard to get into it. But then I found a nice chunk of time to sit down and really read, and I was hooked. I didn't want to put this down. I get up at 4:15 in the morning to go to work. So I go to bed relatively early, and I found myself trying to come up with ways that I could keep reading. You know, I'd look at the time, and I'm trying to think, I'm like, all right, if I read just 2 more chapters, I can sleep in a little bit longer. If I don't get dressed for work, I can still make it on time, right? And I can get a couple more chapters in. That's how compelling this was. And the way the chapters are laid out at the beginning, each chapter is just, it's a date and then a little sort of chapter title that's something from within the chapter, possibly something somebody said or something. But it's, let's just say, October 2nd, and then the next chapter might be October 5th, and then October 6th. And it goes along. But then we get to the point, once the experiment's really moving along and they've implanted embryos in a bunch of cows, like 50 cows, then we have the date, and I think the chapter heading's still a little title, and then it'll say implantation plus 1 day, and the implantation plus 3 days, whatever. And things start moving along, and a lot, as the experiment's moving along, the action is moving along, and characters all sort of doing their things, and we're learning more about everybody, and we'll get glimpses of Colonel Fisher and what he's doing and how he's trying to find this company and shut it down. But then we get to a point where I think the chapter heading is, or the book, because it's broken up, you know, it's book 1, book 2, book 3, within this. So then we get to a book that I think is just 1 day is the book, and then every chapter is the time. So things are just moving that much faster. And then we get past that to the next part, and it's here's the chapter, here's the time. By the end, the last chapter, there's a chapter, it's just broken up. It's down to hours, minutes, and seconds, each little section. It's just flying along. So the pacing on this is just amazing. And as I said, did not want to put it down. Just wanted to keep reading, find out what's going to happen. And there's a lot of details, scientific detail, sort of military gun, airplane, whatever detail. Not overwhelming, which I've tried to read. I have read Tom Clancy, and that was way too much detail, breaking down every little bit about guns and ships and everything. This is much, I want to say in the same vein, but super light compared to what Tom Clancy does. Just the right amount of detail. But it doesn't really gloss over anything. We get a lot of the science of what's going on. We get a lot of the motivations of characters. We get a lot of a great description, like when they first see the C4 and what's been done inside of it. Because essentially, for a point, it's a traveling laboratory, and we get a lot of detail of how that's set up. And this is one of those stories where, you know, things go wrong. There's human error, which compounds the situation. And sometimes it's not human error that compounds the situation. It's very purposeful. Like I said, there is a sociopath in this story. So, you know, I don't want to give anything away because I really think you need to read this. But it's, yeah, so you've got and it says somewhere on the back, you know, or maybe on the front, yeah, it mentions Michael Crichton. So it is very reminiscent of Crichton, some of Crichton's work. Jurassic Park, of course, comes to mind. Just in the whole manipulation of DNA and then things getting out of control kind of thing. It was fascinating, even when there isn't the danger of these things that have been created. There's still the human danger, and I think you're going to love these characters. Some you're simply going to love the way they're written because they're horrible people, but some of them I think you're going to fall in love with some of these characters. Jeanne is a wonderful character, and even, you know, Rumkorff, the doctor and head of the project, he's a dick, but he's still an interesting character. The people, there's a point where they end up on an island called Manitou, excuse me, and the people on that island are very interesting. Not necessarily the most warm-hearted people, at least at first, but they're, again, very good well-rounded characters. And then once the monster mayhem starts, it's fantastic. The creatures in this are very, very interesting, I think. Not something I've seen before. And without going into too much detail, they're horrific and intelligent, and, as I said before, very hungry. So, yeah, I mean, just great stuff. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I'm forgetting. I covered the characters, covered the pacing, which were the two most important things to me. So I think it might be time to get to the rating. Alright, I don't think this will surprise anybody. And there is something I didn't talk about because I wanted to bring it up at this point when I give you the rating. So, Ancestor by Scott Sigler, I give 5 out of 5 very colorful DNA strands. You see all 5 of them there? 5 out of 5. Now you might be asking yourself, hey Eric, if you loved this book so much, why isn't it 6 out of 5? Because, you know, I do that on occasion for books that just blow me away. And I'll tell you why. It's not a perfect book. There are a couple, they're not characters, there are a couple people that aren't in the book, but they are talked about in the book. And it does have that, we're going to mention some things, but we're not going to explain it until later. And it does, that carries on a bit too long. I would have preferred getting that information a little sooner. I can understand, I guess, why the one is held back, I suppose. And personally, the two of these characters, or people, because again, they're not characters in the book. They're just people that are talked about that have something to do with what goes on in the book, but they're not actually in the book, if that makes sense. I looked again, because I was going to say their names are very close, and I kept, since they're not characters, I kept getting them confused. Their names aren't that close, but for me, and again, maybe it was those short bursts where I was reading, I couldn't remember. They'd mention one of them, and then I couldn't remember, well, is that the one that they mentioned about this before, or is it the other one that they mentioned about this before? That could be completely my fault, and not the author's, because as I said, I just looked again, and their names aren't really as similar as I thought. But I had a problem with that, just that sort of, we're going to tease this, and it's going to be quite a while before we tell you what happened in the past and what's made these characters, certain characters or certain situations, what they are. But that's this little thing. The biggest reason is I feel that there is a plot thread that is completely dropped. I don't want to tell you what it is, but there's something that we're seeing throughout the story, and then there's just a point where it never shows up again. And I would have, at the very least, liked to have seen something at the end that tied that up. But it's not there. It just disappears off the face of the earth, essentially. So that's why it's only a 5 out of 5. How horrible. Only 5 out of 5 for Ancestor by Scott Sigler. Really, I can't recommend this book enough. I'm definitely going to check out more of his stuff. If it's, I've said this about other things, but if it's half as good as this, it's going to be worth my time. Just really fantastic book. So that being said, I guess that's it. So if you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put them in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just be polite and post a spoiler warning. So, you know, if you want to know what that plot thread is that I'm talking about that just disappears, we can talk about it. We're just going to put spoiler. before we do. So yeah, comment away. Please like, share, and subscribe. I will have links for the book, 1 or 2 links in the description below if you want to pick it up for yourself. And thank you again to Broncanus for the recommendation. Thank you. This book was fantastic, obviously. And I think that covers it. So this has been the Low Budget Review Show. I have been Eric Smith, and until next time, read more books.